Today on Mother Mayhem.
I think it's really worthwhile to check in with yourself about what you want to do and what you wish you could do. If you were already the woman you wanted to be, living the life you wanted to have, and your mother interfered with or stomped on your boundaries in this way, what would you want to do? Does an answer come to mind? Welcome back to Mother Mayhem, the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Podcast for Daughters. I'm your host, Heather Gray, and today we've got Stacy writing in with an all too familiar question. Her mom is ignoring her requests for no contact and at the same time engaging in a smear campaign all over town, talking to anyone who will listen. What do we do when we can't keep the narcissists away? Just hearing that, I know that this is a story that feels so familiar for all of you listening. And for some of you, this fear that you would set this boundary only to have your mom walk all over it the second you do is the reason that setting boundaries with your mom is so impossible. And for many of you too, you're listening and you know exactly what it's like for Stacy. For people not in your circle and not in your orbit to know all about the personal issues with your mom because she's kind of put them on blast and told anyone who will listen. And what's worse is that people will believe your mom's version of events. Even people who know you and like you and have come to respect you, they'll believe her without even checking with you. And obviously, we know how betraying it is when your mom starts talking shit. But for a lot of you, once your mom starts talking shit, that's what you've come to expect of her. And so you're not entirely surprised that she's blasting your business all over town. The new injury happens when people listen to your mom, when they stop to consider her point of view, and when they know you but decide she's the one telling the truth. First, you're traumatized by your mom throughout your life, and now you're being re traumatized because you're met with more loss, more doubt, and more second guessing of your character. It's embarrassing and awkward at best, but it's incredibly painful and immobilizing at worst. So let's hear what Stacy has to say, and then I'll find you on the other side of her letter. This is what Stacy writes. She says, "Hi, I'm from North Carolina and I'm 26 years old. I've just recently, in the past year or so, gotten really serious about my healing journey. Throughout my life, I've spoken with a few therapists that my insurance covered and really struggled with finding somebody who is the right fit for me. At the time, I wasn't fully aware of the type of abuse I went through and just how serious and traumatic it was. It was my normal at the time, or at least I thought that was some sort of normalcy. But now I'm realizing that my life really never was normal at all. Now that I'm understanding and coming to terms with everything, I understand the kind of therapist I need. Finding your podcast has been so helpful and validating for me. For basically all of my life, I felt so crazy and constantly questioning myself and my own reality. My mother suffers from narcissistic personality disorder on top of some other underlying issues, so my childhood was basically hell. I'm so grateful that you're doing a podcast that is easily accessible and just so spot on. I look forward to hearing more from you. I'm starting episode 3 now, so if you've already touched on this, then please disregard. But I've chosen the route of no contact, which has not been very respected to this point so far. My mom will pop up at my house and try to pry her way into my life, as well as my daughters, which I'm finding very frustrating and incredibly suffocating. I'm also dealing with her going around our small town and approaching anyone who may have went to school with me or be a friend or acquaintance of mine and playing the victim with her stories and tears, which in turn makes me look like a horrible person, takes away from character, reputation, and integrity completely. I know the truth. I know what I have lived, whereas these outsiders don't, and it's very hurtful to have these people know these false opinions or ideas of me based off of my own abuser's story. I didn't know if you could maybe touch on that in a future episode on how to cope or how to handle these situations. Thank you so very much. Oh, Stacy, wow. I am so very glad you wrote in and shared what you've been dealing with. And I know you're not alone in this. This is something that I hear a lot of my clients talking about, and a lot of the women that I work with experience as they try to navigate new relationships with their mothers, as they try to reestablish boundaries. This is the stuff that comes up a lot. And just a reminder for all of you listening that that decision to go no contact is a really personal and individual choice for everyone. And if you haven't gone no contact, that doesn't mean you're doing narcissistic abuse recovery wrong. My goal for this show is to have everybody find what's true for them, who they are, how they want to move through the world, and how they want to navigate their paths, and to be able to find the self compassion and the self acceptance to do so. If you've made this decision, it means that you have come to your moment of knowing what is best for you, how you want to move through your life, and I want you to know that I believe you. Just because your mom is doing this, it does not mean you're making the wrong decision, nor does it mean that you have somehow inserted or implemented the boundary wrong, or that you somehow set yourselves up to fail. Your mom, Stacy, is doing what narcissists do. She's seeing a rule and she's deciding it simply doesn't apply to her. Before we get to know like how you manage this outside of your home, let's first help you manage this inside your home. I want you to start with the new relationship that you're building with yourself. And then I want you to help it with your daughters before we get on to the social pressures of the town. Admittedly, in your letter, you said daughters plural. I didn't know if it was like daughter apostrophe S, you only have one daughter, or if you have more than one daughter. I'm just going with daughters for plural, Stacy, but I don't want you to misunderstand me if you only have a single daughter. Everything I say is true. In any case, I hear clearly that you have already done so much work on yourself with this. And it's my story that you already know what you want to do the next time your mom oversteps that boundary, shows up at your house, or inserts herself with your kids. And I imagine that some of those options that have occurred to you might have ranged from not opening the door to calling the police, and likely a couple of options in between. And before we head to what I think you should do, I think it's really worthwhile to check in with yourself about what you want to do and what you wish you could do. If you were already the woman you wanted to be, living the life you wanted to have, and your mother interfered with or stomped on your boundaries in this way, what would you want to do? Does an answer come to mind? Because you see, when setting boundaries and healing is new to us, we tend to censor those kinds of impulses or thoughts. And we tell ourselves this story that we can't do X, Y, or Z. We tell ourselves story that we can't steep to their level, that we can't give them any kind of satisfaction, that we don't want to escalate things. And it's really important to remind yourself here that when someone else trounces on your boundary, the natural consequence is that these things are going to escalate. Your mother is the one that makes that choice. The second she interferes with your limits, it's not your choice. It's not something you've done. It's her choice and something she has done. What do you wish you did in all of these moments that have happened so fast? Do you wish maybe that you hadn't opened the door, that you ignored her, that you told her to go away? Did you want to call the cops? What was your instinct telling you? You might be thinking to yourself that there is a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. And again, I want to remind you guys here, one of the reasons why I'm doing this show is because so many of this so-called experts out there on narcissism and narcissistic abuse recovery talk in this black or white, all or nothing, our way or the highway, no contact, blah, blah, blah. And I don't buy into that noise. This kind of stuff is incredibly personal, and it isn't in any way black or white. My goal for you, Stacy, and for all of you here is to simply help you find the path that's right for you. There's no singular right way. There's no singular wrong way. There's only the way that is right for you. And I know I'm asking a lot of questions, and I know I always ask a lot of questions. I get these letters that people have to stop and write them down and use them as journaling prompts, and I'm very glad that you do. But in this format where you're not able to get in a word in edgewise as I'm talking, sometimes I recognize that it can feel like I might be assaulting you with questions. And it's not my intention. These are questions that I am giving you permission to ask yourselves. I am giving you permission to not know what your right answer is and to just be curious. Your mom is still going to be narcissistic and impeding your boundaries tomorrow, next week, or next month. So it is entirely okay to take time to get clear with yourself about what you want and what you think should happen next. So while you think on some of these questions, Stacey, I want to give you something to think about here. Probably knowing me, a few things to think about. You've chosen no contact. It's okay to make decisions from the place that preserves no contact. You can not answer the door. You can ignore the text. You can not answer the phone. You can block contact. You can return notes or packages in the snail mail with a return to sender on the back. You can take packages and notes and put them in the trash entirely unopened. All of these are okay things. So let's start with what you've already told your mom. Have you told her that you've decided to go no contact and what that means for you and what that means about her contact with your kids? If you have said it once, you're under absolutely no obligation to say it again. However, I want you to think about how she has acted since you've decided to go no contact. When you first went no contact, did you tell her what the consequences would be if she reached out? Have your consequences for this maybe changed or increased because she's escalated and sharing your business all over town? Is there anything you feel you should communicate that's changed since she started escalating? And again, I don't want you shooting on yourself here. All of you listening too, this is not to say you should be shooting on yourselves. There's nothing here you should do. I'm just walking y'all through the options of what you might want to do so you can decide what is best for you. I also want you to think about something that I'm not sure I've said before, or maybe I just haven't explained it well enough before, but narcissists, they don't have any kind of internal life. They don't think very much about things or about themselves, even. They are always paying attention to other people in relation to how those other people are acting towards themselves. So, things that people are doing, what they're not doing, what they're saying, what they're not saying. Narcissists, they catalog all of these things. Obviously, we know they want the adoration, they want the respect, they want to be seen and valued. But in the absence of that, narcissists will pursue negative attention. Their biggest fear come to life is to not be considered at all, to not be thought of, to not be remembered. They'd rather engage with you about how they stomped on your boundary than not engage with you at all. Any interaction you have with them will be experienced as a reward for their behavior. They got you to consider them. If your mom already knows about no contact, she already knows not to call or text or send anything in the mail or drop anything off. Consider actions you can take to preserve no contact. Don't answer the door. If she persists and continues to come to the property, consider calling the police or having them ask her to leave. If she's doing this drive-by and a hit and run, so to speak, where she just drops things off and then leaves, you can first ignore her, and it's okay to even consider a restraining order. And I know that you are not used to hearing me speak in really drastic terms. And a restraining order is a big action. But sometimes with some narcissists, we have to take big actions to preserve our peace. And I wanted to say that option out loud so that you knew you have permission to consider it. And you might find that you just want to send her a warning shot, that you again want to reiterate your boundary before considering any further action. Before doing that, spend some time considering what you want the consequences to be for her disrespecting your boundary. You might, for example, decide that she doesn't get any of your attention. No words, no actions, no acknowledgement. She can violate no contact, but you don't have to. So, for example, gosh, I can't believe I'm telling this story, but Stacy, it came to mind when I was thinking this through for you. My husband's no contact with his mom. She doesn't struggle with narcissism. She has something called borderline personality disorder. People with narcissism and people with borderline, they share a lot of the same traits and they create a lot of the same kind of disruptions in relationships. Not funny, but funny, because let's face it, friends, this shit is funny sometimes. So, my husband's been no contact with his mom since 2015. And if you really want to get juicy, I don't mind adding that it was since Mother's Day of 2015 in particular. She just couldn't hold her shit together. And it was the last straw, and he was out, and I was so past. I was like quarter past done. I was out too. At some point, I think 2016 or so, his dad died, and his parents had been divorced since my husband was in preschool. But we knew that his mom was going to use this funeral and his passing as an excuse to see him or talk to him. And we decided that no matter what, she wasn't going to get to do that. So she arrives at the funeral, and the first thing she does, you guys will not have a hard time believing this at all. But the first thing she does is she puts herself in the receiving line because, of course, she does. Then she saves her seat with her purse in the front row because, again, of course she does. I ended up having to go to the funeral parlor director. I had to notify him of the situation, and then I had to ask the funeral director to have her move because, P.S., his dad died, but he had since remarried, and his new wife was the one in the receiving line. His new wife, not new, they've been married for years and years, but his current wife, as they might say, had the seat in the front row. My husband's mother had no place in the front row. So while I'm telling the funeral director this and explaining the situation, getting the funeral director to get my mother-in-law to move, my husband, he made no eye contact. He didn't acknowledge her staring. He didn't respond to her talking to him from 2 rows behind us. Just non-acknowledgement. Once the services were over, we got into the car, and that sneaky son of a gun, somehow she got herself between my husband sitting in the car in the driver's seat and the car door. So he couldn't shut the car door. And I just told him, I said, say nothing. I would handle it. And I don't mind saying that. I enjoyed saying that, I think. So he just looked straight ahead. And I went around and I went around the side of the car and I told her, this isn't appropriate. This isn't the place, and she needed to move, and she needed to let us close the door. She kept talking to him. He kept ignoring her. I somehow got myself in between them, and what I decided to do was just keep saying one line over and over. This is inappropriate. You need to move and let us leave. We didn't acknowledge the content of what she was saying. We didn't look at her. I just kept repeating that same line. This isn't inappropriate. You need to move on and let us leave. Over and over again. Somehow, I don't even know how. I don't remember how. Like, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do if this doesn't work. But somehow she moved along. And before we entered reception, we hooked in another family member and we made sure that that family member was on mom watch and that she was put in a position further away from us. And ultimately, my mother in law left early, but not before loading her purse with a bunch of brownies. Sorry, not sorry. This is my show. This shit has been funny sometimes, and I get to lay down some snark when I want to. I share that as an example for you, Stacy, on how to respond when you are faced with the absolute absurdity of what narcissistic mothers can hand us. You don't have to do what we did, but it is an option and it's example for how this stuff can be handled. Not acknowledging what she's saying and simply repeating your boundary. You might opt for a letter, you might opt for an email, you might opt for a text where you directly communicate your message or you reiterate your boundary. If you're searching for words or finding a way to say it, you might say something like, Mom, I told you on such and such date that I was choosing to remove myself from our relationship, that I no longer wish to have contact with you. This decision also discontinues the relationship you have with my kids. I want to be clear in saying that I do not wish for you to come to my home. I do not wish to receive messages, phone calls, letters, or packages from you. I have disconnected us on social media. I have blocked you on all the ways you might contact me. If you speak to me, I will not acknowledge you. If you speak to my kids, I will be prompting them not to acknowledge you either, while removing them from the situation. If this situation continues to escalate or persist, I will, and then you have to insert your boundary. And given that you intend this to be your final boundary, it's important that when you set that boundary, you are only setting it and defining the consequences that you are currently prepared to enforce. If you aren't sure that you're calling the cops, don't say that you're going to call the cops. You might have another boundary, or you might opt to leave out a final boundary altogether because you're just going to figure it out when you get there. All I want you to do, Stacy, is simply say what is true for you. That's all. Again, there is no absolute right thing to say, no absolute wrong thing to say, no perfect way to say it. I'm working with all of you to help you find what is true for you. What's important here is that you're picking the path that works for you and meets you where you're currently at. And I'll admit, I favor crystal clear, transparent communication. You've all heard me use a lot of words on this show to know that that's true. But I also have to say that this kind of communication, it's true for anyone, not just narcissists. There is no way that you can guarantee when you set a boundary, it's going to be adhered to. There's no perfect script, no perfect time, no perfect anything that guarantees the other person will offer you peace. We communicate these things and we set these boundaries to preserve our own peace, to say it out loud. This is what I expect. This is what I deserve. So you only say anything to anyone because not saying something stops working for you, because you have decided to preserve your peace, that this is what you need to do. Now, Stacy, as far as your kids, I'm not sure how old they are. But you're only 26, so I'm thinking they're still pretty young. For many of the moms I see, their instinct is to protect their kids from the drama. And for a lot of moms, they'll decide not to tell their kids anything or they'll sugarcoat things. And I actually believe in telling kids the truth. Because here's the thing, my career, it started out with kids in a residential home. I can tell you that kids always know and they can always tell when something's up. But what happens is they create alternate stories in their head in between the things that they're told. We tell the kids the truth at the age appropriate level. And with older kids and younger kids alike, if they ask, tell them the truth. You don't have to tell them the whole sordid story, but answer the questions they ask with the truth. You can stick to, by the way, only answering the questions they ask. Kids have this way of actually only needing a few details. Their questions are going to tell you how much they can handle. With younger kids, you might consider things like, your grandmother wasn't being nice to me. And you know how we have a rule about that in this house. So until she can be nice, I've told her she can't come over. I know moms of older kids listening to this too. And here's what I'm going to say about handling this with older kids. With older kids, I really like to start introducing them to the idea of getting permission before proceeding with the conversation. So, what I'm talking about here is this idea that we are going to model for them that you are going to get their permission before involving them. So, this is what it sounds like in regular everyday. I know my mom involved you, and that makes me really sad. I didn't want you to have to know about this. But I also know that now that my mom is making you uncomfortable, do you want to know my side, or does that make you feel like you're even more in the middle of the things? You don't have to choose. It's okay with me if you would rather not know. It wouldn't hurt my feelings. Then you can proceed by answering their questions directly. And again, just like I said, only sticking to the questions asked. Remind them that their grandmother very well may try to involve them, and remind them that they don't have any obligation whatsoever to protect or defend you. That isn't their job. They can also choose not to talk to their grandmother if they choose not to. And you might walk them through the same exercise that I just walked you through to help them determine what they might want to say or any boundaries that they may want to set. Stacy, now your town, a small town, things happen, things travel fast. And now your mom's going all around telling her tale to anyone who's going to listen. And unfortunately, people really do listen to this shit, don't they? Here's the thing. Now that I have walked you through taking care of yourself first and then your kids, I'm hoping here that you have the oxygen mask firmly in place. Deciding how much you're going to share, if anything, has to be decided by what feels the most true to and for you. Some people cannot sit in space with anyone or anything without at least getting their side of the story out there. For others, though, they didn't ask for their business to just be put on blast, and they are not looking to change their privacy standards just because their mom decided to blast their privacy. So I tend to, in a way, kind of fall in the middle on this. And as always, again, a reminder, I'm going to say it over and over again on repeat. You're going to get sick of me sick of hearing it and sick of me saying it. But we're finding what works for you. And I don't always think that it works just to stay silent, to do the whole rise above thing and to not participate. Rather, I think you engage with conversation with people who are worth the work of engaging with. What I mean by this, relationships that matter in your life, they're the ones that matter. And I don't think that we're always talking about just family or friends here. Obviously, people in your circle, you're going to tell them what you feel comfortable with. But you might, for example, really value the relationship that you have with your kids' teachers. And if their grandmother knows their teachers, maybe it is worth a conversation with your kids' teachers if they're somehow getting involved and roped in by your mom. You might really want, for example, their pediatrician or primary care doctor to know. If you frequent the same places that your mom does in such a small town and she's telling them things, you might decide that a connection with the other workers and the other, if you're at a diner or a coffee shop you go to all the time, you might decide that some of those relationships matter to you. You get to decide who is worth the work of opening up to. And you always, always, always open up knowing that there is no way to 100% ensure that they don't go reporting back to your mother. You only are sharing what you are comfortable sharing. And if you're choosing to take the pass option, you just say that. Thanks so much for reaching out, or thanks so much for checking in on this. Gosh, I really wish my mom hadn't included you in this, but alas, here we are, and she has. I don't actually wish to involve you any further, so I'm not going to say anything else. But here's something I can offer. You know me. You know who I am and how I am. And I trust you to know whether or not the things my mom has said about me actually ring true for you. I trust myself that I have been consistent with who I am and how I move through the world for you to know me and to know how I act. Thanks for asking my side, and I hope you're going to understand my desire to not say anything further. If you are going to share, you're sharing because the person is worth the work of being vulnerable with and of sharing this part of you in your story. Again, just like with your kids, I kind of like the idea of getting permission first. And it's okay to say, oh gosh, this is so awkward. I hate that my mom got you into all of this. And if you're just hearing what she says and thinking to yourself that it doesn't quite sound like me, of course it's not me. You know me. I don't need to drag you into this any further than you already are. If it would help you to know my side, or if you feel like you need to know my side to know what the deal is so you know how to respond or what to say next time she ropes you in, I totally get it and I don't mind sharing. It's just going to make things awkward for you, and I want to make sure you're okay with it because I'm just okay knowing that you know me and that you trust me. Then, once you have that permission, you can share your side as much as you're comfortable with, only as much as you're comfortable with, but you're only sharing what it is you think you need to say. Don't go setting yourself up with the expectation that the other person is going to believe you. You are speaking your truth because not speaking your truth has stopped working for you. And you might find that with some people, you feel comfortable asking them to turn your mom down, to ask them not to engage. Getting people to boundary set who may not be used to setting boundaries, it isn't fun. And largely, sometimes I often find it's not worth the energy. But if you're comfortable saying something, you might say something like, hey, come on, let's face it. My mom might pop in again with another story. You don't have to listen. I would actually really prefer it if you didn't. But if anyone knows how bullheaded my mom can be or how she refuses to take no for an answer, it's going to be me. So it's okay if you just want to push the conversation through and ignore her. Whatever works for you is going to work for me. Feel free to be clear with the person. Ask them not to report to your mom what you said to them. You may not get it, but it is always worth asking. And here's the thing, Stacy, you didn't ask me about this, but a lot of people feel social pressure when they go no contact with their parents. People who hear about it don't get it. They tend to have a lot of opinions. They hold a value that the parent child bond is sacred, even if the parent was the first one to break it. Obviously, I don't agree with that, but I know that people put their opinions out there. And for some of those opinions, you're likely going to choose not to say anything. If you need to say something or you want to say something, but you're not quite sure what to say, instead of silence, you might consider saying something like, I'm so glad for you that you don't understand what broke down between mom and me. I would never want you to know the pain of that broken parent child bond, and I would never want you to have to feel that. It's a compassionate statement. It doesn't give a lot of information away, and it largely can effectively shut a conversation down. Another way of responding to some of that noise is to say something like, I know you disagree. I get it. And I don't think I would be able to say anything to you that's going to get you to change your mind or get you to see it differently. I accept that this doesn't make sense to you. I hope you're going to accept that that doesn't make me change my mind. So much about managing these situations, Stacy, and all of you listening It comes down to communication, deciding what you need to say and to who you need to say it to, deciding who is worthy of your truth and who is worthy of your vulnerability. Stacy, I'm so glad you reached out with this question, and I hope that my response here today has helped you some. Anyone who wants my 2 cents on your situation, you're always going to be welcome to reach out to me, just like Stacy did. The email address for that is heather@daughtersnpd.com. You can send an email or a recorded voice memo, and I would really be glad to help. Thank you so much, Stacy, for sharing. Next week, we help Monica. And yes, I totally stole that from Friends. Monica is managing some family drama. Her mom has put each of her kids in a different role, and Monica finds herself trying to set boundaries with her mom and with her brothers. We're diving into that story next week. I am so glad to have all of you here for all of this, and I am looking forward to being back with you next week. You are all in it together, and I am in it with you too. Bye for now. I'm so grateful that you're here. You're right where you're supposed to be. At its heart, I'm hoping to use this show to build a community of women working together to heal from childhoods marked by maternal narcissism and emotional neglect. My goal for Mother Mayhem is that this show becomes an advice and mentoring driven show where you share your questions, struggles, and stories, and I offer you direction for healing and recovery. That can't happen without your contributions. I invite you to send a recorded voice memo or write in an email with your questions and things you're struggling with. You can always find me over at heather@daughtersnpd.com. To connect further, I invite you to find me over at Instagram and occasionally on TikTok at DaughtersNPD. If you know another woman who needs this conversation in her life, I'm going to ask that you share the show with her. You can help me get the word out with your reviews and social shares of the show, and I hope you'll consider doing so. Special thanks to Heather Clark for editing this show. She's in my head and knows what I meant to say when the words come out backwards. Thanks for your time today. I'm always in it with you. Bye for now.